Hello, I'm David, and I'm the architect of the Recovery Capital Index. I am really thrilled that you're taking a few moments out of your day to learn more about the RCI. The Recovery Capital Index is a scientifically validated survey instrument that holistically measures individuals' change around their own well-being or addiction recovery. What I want to share with you is how we developed the Recovery Capital Index, why it was necessary to be developed, and the intersection of that development with my own experiences. So let's start in October of 2012. I had just begun a job at an organization in Sioux Falls, South Dakota called Face It Together. Face It Together provides peer coaching for drug and alcohol addiction. They do that for individuals who are struggling with addiction themselves or might be in recovery, but also for loved ones. Now, my job at the time was to develop an affiliate program so that we could take the model that had been built or created in Sioux Falls and bring it to other communities around the region and around the United States. But that work got upended a couple months later when there was a meeting going on in our office with a local healthcare executive and the two co-founders of Face It Together, Kevin Kirby and Charlie Day. And in the course of that meeting, the healthcare executive said, we really love the stories that you all tell of transformation and redemption and recovery. Those stories bring hope to many, and they are incredibly powerful. But they're not data. And it was in that moment that Charlie, who lived by a mantra of, if you're in a meeting and you hear what you need to hear, the meeting is over. So he got up, he walked over to my desk, and he said, David, you've got 30 days. Figure out how to measure addiction recovery. Now, I will tell you that there were two things sort of at play in thinking about that question. The first was my experience is in radio broadcasting. I was a journalist in radio for nearly 10 years. I wasn't a data scientist. I wasn't a researcher, but I worked around the notions of curiosity. So the question got me very curious. It also got me very curious because of my own lived experiences with addiction and depression and anxiety. What I knew is what society told me was the single metric that mattered: sobriety. If you're sober, you're well and you're welcome. If you're not, you're not. Systems were built upon that single metric, that binary of on or off. Criminal justice, addiction treatment, healthcare, all of it built around, along with society, of whether or not an individual is sober. But what I knew in my own experience from 2005 and on was that there was so much more at play. There were so many other drivers towards an individual being able to overcome such great challenges. So now let me take you back, because in the middle of going through the literature and the research, I was thinking about my own experience. And in one particular moment kept coming up. And it was in 2005. That's me. I had just been sentenced to a third offense, felony DUI, in Winter, South Dakota. This was at the end of about 12 years of deep struggle and pain and lots of interaction with healthcare and treatment and the criminal justice system. I had attempted suicide 3 times, and now here I was, really kind of at the end of a really long road. And I had just been sentenced, but it was in that sentencing. And there was a question that the judge asked during that hearing that kept coming back to my mind. And it was, how did you get here? How did you, somebody with access to financial capital, family and friends, some whom were in that courtroom that day, someone who had gone to college, hadn't got a degree, but had been to college for 6 years, someone who worked in a professional career for nearly a decade. How did you get here? What did society do wrong? Where are the failures? She couldn't quite understand it. But what I was able to do from 2012 and a lot of the things that I had actually successfully accomplished in going backwards and reverse engineering was she was asking the right questions. But what was missing was there was no way to sort of measure the other things besides my sobriety. So we can only change that which we measure. And so I started to think about that moment. I started thinking about the moments and times of my life as things were growing from 2005 on. So for instance, moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, into a sober home, decided to go back to college, thought I was going to get back into radio, and then in walks into my life a former public defender who said to me, David, you have got to become a lawyer. I didn't buy it at first, but it started to make a lot more sense. As she said, this was Professor Sandy McEwen at the University of South Dakota, she said, David, there aren't many lawyers who've had the experience of waking up in a holding cell, of going through the criminal justice system like you have, of struggling with mental health and addiction issues like you have. You would be the very best advocate for people who've experienced what you have in that system. So I bought in, found my way, and was able to get into law school at the University of South Dakota School of Law. And then, of course, got out of law school, graduated, passed the bar exam. But if we go back forward in 2012 and 2013, when I'm now working on that question of how do you measure addiction recovery, what I am also doing at the time was preparing for my hearing to prove my good moral character to the Board of Bar Examiners in the state of South Dakota. And so all of these questions of, well, how do I actually show? How do I demonstrate this? Of course, there were 14 elements that I had to prove, and we walked through and we did that. But that was really a big driver, a catalyst for figuring out, okay, can we systematize this? Can we quantify how we measure all of this particular change? Now, I should tell you, we had the hearing and the Board of Bar Examiners pushed my case up to the state Supreme Court and recommended that I be licensed to practice law. After a year, the state Supreme Court said yes. And so what I got to do is go back to that courtroom. And instead of being sentenced by that judge, Kathleen Trandle, she had to swear me in as a lawyer in the state of South Dakota. Now, there is so much in there besides just my sobriety. And all along the way, what became very clear to me when trying to solve this particular question was, what if we could put the right people and the right things in place with the right questions and the right potential answers, and we can help people move through change better? So it's not guesswork. And that's what became the Recovery Capital Index. Now, it took us a while. We scoured the earth. We went through all of the research in the literature in happiness and well-being and quality of life and social progress and, of course, recovery capital. So we read everything from Jeffrey Sachs and Michael Porter, and then in the recovery space, William White and David Best and Alexandra Laude. And we really liked the concept of recovery capital, which is pretty simple. It's the depth and breadth of internal and external resources that help or hinder our recovery. Now, you can apply that generally to anyone and all of us, right? We all have things that progress us or stop us from making progress for our own well-being. We just had to systematize this. And there were 3 natural domains that we could sort of work from: personal capital, social capital, and cultural capital. But what we really had to do was sort of find the questions. What were the right questions to ask in each of those areas that weren't just on the surface, but took us down a couple of layers? So for instance, it's not enough to know that a person is employed. We want to know also, how are you employed? So is it full-time, part-time, etc.? But then, are you satisfied in that employment? And does that employment support your well-being efforts, your recovery efforts, whatever it might be? And if not, that now gives us a place to make some change and to start to look for new decisions that we can make and choices that we can make and places we can change. And so that's what we were really searching for, some of those more deeper level questions. And we found a bunch of questions. Actually, we started at 121 questions. And because we were building this and developing it through the organization of Face It Together, we actually had people we could work through with these questions, and we could test it and we could get feedback. And we knew that 121 questions was too much. And so we got feedback from those that we were helping and the coaches in that moment, and from other researchers and experts from around the country. And ultimately what we came back to was a much more stable version, 68 questions, quantify it from 0 to 100. And we found that if we asked this survey every 30 days, we got the best potential results to help people quantify their change, but also have really sound information to start to make decisions about the change that they want. And so that's the Recovery Capital Index. We had one last step in this journey of developing the Recovery Capital Index, and that was scientifically validating it. Does it measure what we say it measures? And so we partnered with some outside researchers from Sanford Research, and we gave them all of our data. And they did what they do best as biostatisticians, and they put it under the harshest scrutiny that was possible. And ultimately, the question was, does it measure what it say it measures? And statistically, they found that it did. So we wrote those findings up in a journal article, submitted that article for peer review at South Dakota Medicine, and published that article in May of 2018. When we published that article, we started getting interest and questions of whether or not the RCI was available to be licensed. We weren't really sure about that answer. We were a small nonprofit and didn't exactly know which direction we wanted to take that. But over the course of a year or so, it was my job to kind of figure that out. And in working and collaborating with Face It Together, we realized that maybe the next best step would be to develop it into a product, put it into another organization that could really do two things ultimately. Get the RCI right and continue to build upon it so that it can grow and help more people and help more organizations. That was first. But then second, over time, also have a continued benefit for the mission of Face It Together. So just this last July, I left Face It Together and founded an organization or company called Commonly Well. Commonly Well's purpose and mission is to further develop the Recovery Capital Index and bring greater well-being into society through tools like the RCI. And so now the RCI is available, and that's the story behind it. I hope you'll take one more step along with us and want to learn even more. See how the RCI works. See how we can analyze the data across many different ways for individuals and organizations and even for communities. I'd love to share more about the tool. I'd love to learn more about the work that you do. So please give me a call, send an email, learn more on the website, and I hope we get a chance to connect and learn more about each other. And of course, we can measure well-being. And when we measure, we can start to make dramatic change. So thank you for taking the time and learning more about the Recovery Capital Index.